Boris Johnson cancelled, Donald Trump cancelled. Welcome back to Not the BCFM Politics Show for those that want to bypass the psycho in the corner on the talkradio.org.uk stream and live on Not the BCFM Politics Show app, available free from all good app stores, not necessarily Google. Joining me is Irish Republican Labour activist Martin Summers, and I hope from the United States, Don DeBar. Tony Gosling here, of course. Don, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Don, just give us, for those that haven't heard you before, a brief resume of your activities. You're somebody who was working, I think, wasn't it, in property and then got into radio in the States?
Yes, my business career, or whatever profession, was in the title insurance business in New York, which is, in essence, a conjunction of real estate law, finance, and things that have to do with real property. I have been always interested in politics, and particularly in journalism and politics, and since I was 6 years old. And when I got into my late 30s, early 40s, I started interacting with people who were doing journalism. I was interacting with them as an activist and sending press releases and all of this, and a lot of folks in independent media in the New York and U.S. areas were seeing my work, and a couple of them said, why don't you come work with us? And so I ended up, at WBAI Radio, which is one of Pacifica Radio's stations, the one in New York. I was there for a while. And since then, I've been doing political commentary. I do a piece for the afternoon drive time news at KPFK in Los Angeles pretty much every day, Monday through Friday, and a bunch of other stuff. For example, I'm going to be traveling through China beginning the end of this month to the middle of next month, and the Old Silk Road, looking at the situation of Muslims up close, aside from the propaganda that's being pushed out.
No, so is that paid for by the Chinese?
No, it's paid for by me.
Okay, well done.
I wish the hell somebody was paying for it.
Well, that's lovely, isn't it? But you see, the thing is, so many of these things, the reason I ask is because what we quite often hear from is journalists who are paid by someone who's got an agenda on these things. So what's your agenda on this issue, or don't you have one?
My agenda is to observe and report. So, one of the primary points of propaganda about China that's used by the United States, forgetting whatever China really is, which is a whole other big question. There's supposedly an oppression of minorities in China, particularly the, depending on the pronunciation, the Uyghurs, the Igors, the Uyghurs, the folks in the up in the northwestern part, like what would be Seattle on a map of the United States, and in general, an alleged intolerance and racist ideology towards the other among the Chinese elite and chosen. This is the subtext, not even subtext, but this is the propaganda position of the U.S. In other words, the white supremacist culture that conquered the world, including China, that devastated cultures from one side of the planet to the other, that extincted any number of people. They are pointing fingers at China. So I thought, gee, if we go there and bring a camera and talk to people, let's find out what's actually happening. And so that's what I'm going to do. That's what a journalist is supposed to do.
That's what they are supposed to do. But, this is what amazes me is quite often with these big, important stories that you're only getting one side. Anyway, so what do you make of, before we start talking about Donald Trump, what do you make of Joe Biden talking about building a railroad across the Indian Ocean this week?
What? I didn't even hear that one. Run that by me again.
Oh, well, actually, I can dig you out the audio of it if you want.
But let's listen to that together. Yes.
Yeah, we can do that. But can you, in the meantime, just tell us something about this guy? I mean, he's saying, I'm probably going to get into trouble now. I'm going off script. That's what he said just afterwards. So he doesn't really seem to be, and I don't know if it's anyone in the world, apart from someone who's been paid to say it, that would say that he's all there.
Well, and even then you have to pay them handsomely because they have to live with that later. Okay, first of all, he's one of a number of American politicians. There's, for example, Hank Johnson, who's a representative, a Democratic representative from a district in Georgia, the state of Georgia, who at a hearing, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now, 5 years ago or something. This is a guy that Nancy Pelosi picked to replace Cynthia McKinney in Congress because they didn't, Pelosi and whoever the hell she actually works for did not want to have Cynthia McKinney in Congress. So they did all these, machinations.
Yeah, she was brilliant. Cynthia was fantastic. She was a 9/11 Truth person, wasn't she?
Yeah, among other things, yeah. And so once they pushed her out, this is the guy who ended up in that seat. And he once at a hearing was making an inquiry. They were doing something to do with the Pentagon or military spending or whatever, and had to do with Guam, with the military base at Guam. Guam is like this island that is essentially it's American military bases, and then the people of Guam get to occupy like a corner over here, or Bob offshore. And they were discussing a construction project or funding some construction project or something, and he said, well, have any of the engineers looked to see to make sure it's not going to sink into the ocean if we build this? So Joe Biden talking about building a railroad in the Indian Ocean is not unique among the geniuses in Washington, D.C. That's my point.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a listen now to, this is off script, Biden.
Well, we're going to win and we're going to help. We have plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean. We have plans to build in Angola, one of the largest solar plants in the world. I can go on, but I'm not. I'm going off script. I'm going to get in trouble.
Yes, you certainly are. So, a railroad across the Indian Ocean. Apparently, he's just really reacting to, and he's trying to sort of put down the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative when he's saying, actually, the Americans are building this Indian Ocean Railroad. Give us your summary of Biden, because a lot of people have voted for him in the States because they really wanted to have a more inclusive nation that felt like it was much more welcoming to foreigners, for example, and they see the Republican Party as too jingoistic.
Well, okay, first of all, in terms of Biden's vote, a lot of the voters shared the surname Occupant, and he definitely won the cemetery vote. There were allegations that are very credible of ballot box stuffing that occurred in the swing states that swung in the middle of the night from Trump to Biden, that swung the election from Trump to Biden. So as far as all that goes, that question hangs anyway.
Wasn't there an inquiry into that found Biden innocent?
No. The fundamental legal issues involved as to whether or not there should have been this huge number of paper ballots was never touched by the courts. It rested upon the fact that the change in the law that enabled this in the swing states, particularly in Pennsylvania and Georgia, was not accomplished by the state legislature. And in fact, in Pennsylvania, it was rejected by the state legislature, and instead was done by a governor's executive order or by the attorney general's interpretive ruling or by the commissioners of elections rules change. And if you look at the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, the conduct of the presidential election shall be as established by the legislatures of the various states. It's not the exact language, but that's the exact intent and the exact verb, the exact statement. And so there was this jockeying that was going on in 2019 before the COVID epidemic to accomplish this huge expansion in the use of paper ballots. Now, normally, paper ballots are for people that are going to be sick or on vacation. They call them absentee ballots. I'm going to be absent.
Well, we have postal ballots here.
Yeah, I think that's what you mean, isn't it? Postal.
Yes, exactly. It's remote balloting on paper. They send you the ballot. You fill out the ballot. Ostensibly, it's you, and then it gets submitted. The reason I made the comment about Occupant, for example, is what happened in districts in Philadelphia, which swung Pennsylvania, was there was a massive distribution by mail of ballots to people that they weren't on the rolls anymore. Some of them were dead, and a lot of them voted. and this was never examined by the courts in Pennsylvania. It was dismissed. One court said, we are reluctant to step into this particular controversy because we don't think it's the role of the courts to upset the result of an election. That's what they said in the state.
What we get week after week here is that this is all a farce, and that Trump is ridiculous to question the result of that ballot. But anyway, I think you've certainly given us some of the other point of view. So what do you make of this week's prosecution of Trump? I mean, he takes a bit of a different attitude to Boris Johnson in that he will go pretty much straight out into the public and give his views about all this. We've had basically Boris's mates over here when he's been forced to resign as an MP talking about that, but in the US it's very different. Can you just give us a bit of background on this legal case against Trump, apparently having documents, I suppose we should say allegedly having documents that are a threat to national security in a box in his garage that shouldn't have been there?
Well, first of all, the legal term for, or in any way the term of art, I guess, for what's happening here is this is a phenomenon that we see not just with Trump and or with Boris Johnson. We saw it with Mel Zelaya in Honduras. We saw it with both Dilma Rousseff, and also with Lula in Brazil. We saw it with Fernandez Kirchner in Argentina. In other words, what happens is where the machinery of power is not able to contain the dissatisfaction of the people at the ballot box, then by other means, other parts of the machinery of the state, they take out this particular threat to their position. Forgetting whether Trump really is or is not a threat to bourgeois control or even imperialism or whatever. There are things that he does and says that are not acceptable, obviously. I mean, it's this deduction on my part, but it is obvious that he does something that makes a broad part of the power structure unhappy enough to spend a whole lot of time talking about him and how he's the most evil and stupid and horrible person that ever lived, and so is anyone that would think of supporting him.
Well, I mean, maybe they've spent quite a lot of time accumulating lots of mass media chips, lots of judicial chips, and they're actually rather like using them from time to time and say, right, we're going to use them against this particular candidate.
Yeah, there's that. But he's kind of unique. I mean, I remember Howard Dean, for example. He was running as a sort of an anti-war candidate against the Iraq War in 2004. And he had, just because of that, because he was perceived as that, okay? He wasn't Dennis Kucinich by any means or Cynthia McKinney by any means. But he was perceived as that enough where it lifted him out of oblivion to being, it was a front runner for a minute. So he's at a rally and he's enthusiastic and he screams or whatever. They capture the scream and they play it across the media over and over, and they name it the scream heard around the world, and it's supposedly, it becomes in the culture evidence of him being unhinged. Do you want this screaming crazy guy to have his finger on the button? Those same media outlets haven't raised a question about the guy who takes instructions from the Easter Bunny, who's conducting a war against Russia, having his finger on the button, but they took Howard Dean out doing that. Donald Trump has been promoted by the media, since, I don't know, I remember in the early 80s even. In the 80s, Michael J. Fox movie, Donald Trump does a walkthrough in the hotel that he's a concierge at. And this is like, sort of like an illustration of, the hoi polloi or the billionaire class or whatever. All kinds of media, anywhere he's there. He's got product placement like crazy. He's going to run for president. I'm being interviewed by Russian TV and Chinese TV and everybody else but American TV about the election in the middle of 2015. And Jeb Bush is running, at the top on one side, and Hillary Clinton is leading on the other. this was 2015. And so they're talking about the stories are all positioned around the two dynasties and all this stuff. And then they asked me about Trump. And I'm in New York and I'm in real estate. Okay. So I know exactly what he is. The main thing, his main product is his name. He licenses his name to real estate projects so that they can call it a Trump property. And suddenly the value of it goes up 20%. And they pay 5% or something. They make money on this. So I'm saying to them, look, he's running for president. He's enhancing the value of his product. That's what it is. And I had no idea he'd actually ever have a chance of getting elected or that he wanted to. He said, and they're promoting the hell out of him. Then he says, maybe NATO is obsolete. And all of a sudden, all those characters that did all the stuff to Howard Dean came out from the four corners under the rocks, every damn place they were, and they came and they started trashing him. And then they did the same thing they did to Howard Dean. They turned off his mic. And then nobody heard from Trump for a couple days. Every 4 years, the news channels make their bones, and the newspapers make their bones that their money, their ad revenue is during a presidential election year because people look at that media then. Well, when Trump was out, they stopped looking, and they noticed it within a week. And suddenly, they had to cover him, but they had this problem that he was speaking heresies. And once he saw that, he continued to do it. Iraq was a mistake. You people lied. You saw that in one of the debates. And, well, here we are. This is the only way they can take him out. He would be president. He's winning. He's leading everybody, again, in the polls. And he was already indicted before this indictment. People are sending him money like crazy because they understand there's a contradiction with the system, and they understand that their precarious situation, their discomfort is a consequence of the way the system treats them. And so they got a problem with the system, and they see him not even as their hero or the guy in a white knight, just as an enemy of the system, and therefore I'm with you.
What about the rights and wrongs of the case, though?
Oh, in terms of the case itself, it's an absurd case. He was president of the United States. The right to classify and declassify documents rests entirely with the executive branch. The president is the penultimate officer of that. At will, he declassifies things. Congress has no right to infringe on that, and nor do the courts.
Well, he's not. The thing is, he's not president anymore. I think what they're saying is that these documents, these documents, he can't just declassify them after he's been president.
No. When he took them, he declassified them.
Right. I mean,
there's no formal act required.
Oh, okay. Right.
The act of taking the documents and then walking out as a civilian is an act of declassification. They said it to Clinton. When the Clintons took the furniture when they left, aside from a boatload of documents. and what's his name? Mamaroneck. I can't remember the name of there's a group, Judicial Watch, sued. They sued the National Archive, whatever the hell they call the group of knuckleheads that are in charge of the papers, and everybody else involved. And the court said, you're right, this really is not a good thing, but sorry, he's the president. When he touches it and says it and declassifies it, he doesn't have to say it out loud. If he says it in his head, if it's its intent to declassify, it's declassified. Period. That's a standing case, by the way.
Interesting, and especially if there's precedence for it too. And let's have a listen now to Donald Trump. He jetted off to Bedminster. I'm not quite sure what that is. That is actually a district of South Bristol here as well, which is not necessarily the place you'd expect to find Donald Trump. It's a kind of Bristolians, localers, rather poorer end of town. But anyway, this is what he had to say.
When murderers are allowed to roam, these are horrible killers, murderers are allowed to roam the streets of our Democrat-run cities unchecked, but the incompetent district attorney in New York indicts Trump for a crime that everybody agrees, every pundit, everybody, there is no crime. But murderers go out and nobody ever even comes and knocks on their door, and they know they're there, and they know their rooms, and they know their locations, and they're roaming our cities all over. And some of them are coming in right now through our borders. But then you have a nation that, as we are, is in serious decline. We have a nation in serious decline. If the communists get away with this, it won't stop with me. They will not hesitate to ramp up their persecution of Christians, pro-life activists, parents attending school board meetings, and even future Republican candidates, which they do. We must end it permanently, and we must end it immediately. Now that the seal, so important, is broken, the seal is broken by what they've done. They should never have done this. This was an unwritten rule. You just don't, unless it's really bad. But you just don't. But the seal is now broken. In addition to closing the border and removing all of the criminal elements that have illegally invaded our country, making America energy independent and even dominant again, and immediately ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. I'll have it ended in 24 hours. I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. Name a special prosecutor. And all others involved with the destruction of our elections, our borders, and our country itself. They're destroying our country. And when I'm reelected, and we will get reelected, we have no choice. We're not going to have a country anymore. I will totally obliterate the deep state. We will obliterate the deep state. And we know who they are. I know exactly who they are. They want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. It's very simple. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. They want you silenced. And I am the only one that can save this nation because you know they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way, and I will never be moving. On November 5th, 2024, justice will be done. We will take back our country, and we will make America great again. Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great job. Thank you.
Okay, so that's Donald Trump speaking this week, Martin. We had to say goodbye to Don DeBar. If you want to catch up with him, he's now live on Press TV, although, of course, that's banned in Britain. You can find it online, and you can watch him live if you want to now. Although I suppose I shouldn't be saying don't listen to this show. Don is over there now live on Press TV, the Iranian state broadcaster in English. He's saying he's pressing some buttons there. I'm going to get rid of the deep state. I'm going to stop the Ukraine-Russia war. And as Don mentioned, out of NATO.